Hello and welcome back to r/Entitled Parents. And if you're new here, I hope you enjoy.
Ex-girlfriend was a scammer, so I put her in the slammer. Bippity boppity boo, I destroyed her family too. Sorry about the length, but you need the details. Around the time that I got my first full-time job and finished college, I decided I was ready to venture out and start dating. I had heard about this amazing app through a few of my co-workers, a little thing called Tinder, so I decided to give it a shot. After about a week on the app, I finally matched with a woman who we will call Talia. Talia lived in a different city than I did, but the day we matched, she said she was visiting a cousin. We messaged through the app, and after verifying she was real, through her Facebook and Instagram profiles, we exchanged phone numbers. She said she was employed full-time, had an apartment and her own car, and was somehow still single. We talked for about 2 weeks on the phone, always at night after my shift at work, before we finally had a chance to meet when our schedules matched up. I drove my beat-up 1996 Honda Civic to her town, and we spent that Friday night together, and in the morning we had breakfast at Waffle House. Talia did have her own apartment, however she lived next door to her grandmother, who I awkwardly had to meet the next morning. I learned from Talia that her car was actually in her grandmother's name, and her apartment was in the name of her cousin. She went as far as to show me her family portraits with her cousin to talk about her abusive ex, and even shared with me how her laundry room was embarrassingly infested with flies and roaches. We officially changed our social media to dating that day. Keep in mind that this was my first relationship in almost 4 years, so I was excited. This is the scam. Talia also told me that day that she had been fired from work about a week earlier, but was too embarrassed to tell me. I asked how she had kept up her bills, and she said that her grandma and dad had been helping her. Talia asked if I could help her make her car payment, which was due that weekend. I refused. She then explained that she could get a payday loan, which is banned in our state, and it could be put into my checking account. I felt uneasy about it and asked if there was another way she could get the loan. Talia said that she couldn't use her grandma or dad's accounts because they had burned her in the past. I thought it was weird, but she started crying, so I called my bank, where I've had an account since high school graduation, and I opened a linked checking account. I gave Talia the new checking account number and routing number. Talia contacted a payday loan company in Alabama, and by Sunday morning, she had the funds in my linked checking account. Per our agreement, I gave her the money. Talia promised to repay the loan within 2 weeks. I had my reservations but went back home and back to work Monday. Talia called me on Wednesday and said she had a new job. I asked if she had the payday loan squared away with her first paycheck. She said she did, but I still got charged $47 2 weeks after she set up the loan. So I called my bank, and then I called Talia to verify the loan was going through her, and terminated the charge from the payday loan as I was not the signed person. Talia and I agreed to meet Memorial Day weekend 2 weeks later. She stated that her dad had given her a check for the entire loan amount, $1,800, and that she would deposit it into my bank near her. Like a fool, I let her deposit the check right before Memorial Day weekend. 2 weeks later, the payday loan company charged another $47 plus penalty fees and another $47. The $1,800 check bounced. Talia stopped answering her calls and blocked me on everything. I called my bank and informed them that I was the victim of fraud. Within hours, my main checking account, into which my paycheck had gone, my savings account with $800 saved for a new car, and the new checking account were closed. My best friend from college, we'll call him Clark, found Talia had 2 of every social media account, the one she shared with me and the one which she had a boyfriend. Her cousin from her family photos was actually her boyfriend since high school. Her boyfriend, we'll call him Jason, was in prison, but from their social media posts, she was visiting him once a month, minimum, and had plans to marry him. I spent days trying to get back my accounts and my money. One of the representatives from my bank, and Clark, and my mum advised that I should press charges for fraud. My bank mailed me a copy of the bounced check for criminal investigation purposes, and it showed Jason's name and not Talia's father's name as the owner of the check. That's when I decided to get revenge. The Revenge. As mentioned before, Talia's apartment had a minor infestation of roaches and flies in her laundry room. While I went through legal agencies to pursue pressing charges of forgery on the check, fraud, etc., I found the name and phone number of Talia's apartment complex. I left a message for the apartment complex management that Talia and her grandmother both had filthy apartments. Within a week, Clark showed me that Talia had posted a request for temporary housing for her and her grandma, since her parents wouldn't let her move in. Talia's payday loan company began calling me, as Talia had given them my phone number instead of hers, and they had not received payment yet. I was still reviewing my legal options at the time. One day, I answered and notified the rep that Talia had fraudulently used my checking account. The rep who called me transferred me to their legal department, who was very interested. It turned out that Talia's grandma and her father owed to the payday loan company. It wasn't a lot separately, but the payday loan company had enough evidence with my claim that Talia was the ringleader using her family's accounts. I turned over my evidence, including Talia's text messages promising to pay, the copy of the bounced check, and my bank statements. By the end of the year, Talia was arrested on several charges. Her grandmother and father were also arrested, but took pleas for lesser charges in exchange for turning over evidence on her. I didn't have to testify at the trial, but I kept informed. Talia's grandma had had a minor heart attack when she was arrested, and had a more significant one during the trial. I'm not sure if grandma lived or died after the trial. Despite this, Talia went to prison for multiple counts, and will serve more than a decade behind bars. Too long, didn't read. My ex-girlfriend was a piece of scum. She took and left me without a crumb. I got her and her grandmother evicted. No jury had them acquitted. Hope she's in prison having fun. And our final story today, Maleficent's Revenge, how my cousin exacted revenge for years of entitled parent behaviour. This is going to be a long post, as I have to detail several years of entitled parent behaviour by my aunt in order to justify the retribution exacted by my cousin. Backstory. My mum is the oldest of 4 children and gave birth to me a few months before her youngest sister, let's call her Cruella, gave birth to my cousin, Maleficent. From the day she brought Maleficent home, Cruella groomed my cousin to be a beauty pageant kid. She started getting Maleficent's hair done as soon as she could, and raised Maleficent to only wear dresses and very dainty shoes. When I briefly lived with my aunt, she used the money my mum sent home to provide for my care to get Maleficent new clothes and hair instead. Cruella had a full-time job as a grocery store cashier, and also received child support from Maleficent's father, who was in the US Air Force, but she spent thousands of dollars on making sure her daughter was always beauty pageant ready. When we got older, I was a grade level ahead of Maleficent. Cruella made Maleficent compete with me academically regardless of the difference in our classes. We were both good students and lived in different states, but Cruella would call my mum once a month and would ask detailed questions about my report cards. If my mum told her that I earned all A's, Cruella would implement various punishments until Maleficent had just as good or better grades. At first, Cruella would belittle her own daughter with taunts. Then she would deny buying Maleficent any cookies, toys, etc. until her grades improved. When we started hitting our growth spurts, Cruella would make Maleficent wear old dresses and shoes that were way too small until her grades improved. Naturally, this made life difficult for me and my mother. Maleficent grew to resent me, and she often did petty things to get me in trouble, like breaking my grandmother's doll collection, breaking dishes, and she even fought me a couple of times when I refused to be bullied. Mum stopped discussing my grades with Cruella, which worked until Mum and I moved back to her hometown, where Cruella lived, and enrolled in the same school as Maleficent. Then Cruella began to volunteer at the school on report card days, just so she could compare our grades. This continued into our college years. I ended up dropping out of college after 3 semesters as I had developed a drinking problem. I had to undergo a few months of treatment. Maleficent was enrolled in college by this time, and Cruella maintained her streak of competition by calling my mum to report how well my cousin was doing before snidely pointing out that I was no longer in college. I changed numbers after Cruella called me one day to tell me that Maleficent was applying for study abroad, then asked how my borderline minimum wage retail job was going. The irony was that Maleficent would end up being a 4th year junior in college when I finally returned to college. More on that later. By the time I returned to college, our grandma, Mum and Cruella's mum, was in a nursing home due to dementia-related problems. She had been diagnosed while we were in high school, but the disease was progressing rapidly. Mum, being the eldest child, quit her job to spend every day at the nursing home talking to grandma, reading to grandma, etc. Mum wanted to have grandma return to grandma's home, but Cruella refused. Cruella had secured power of executor of the estate shortly after grandma's diagnosis, meaning that she had the ability to place grandma in the home despite her siblings' protests. It also meant that Cruella technically had ownership of grandma's home and the land on which it sat. Fast forward a couple of years, Maleficent began dating a local pastor's son, let's call him Charming, and they got engaged in April, after dating for 3 months. Cruella coincidentally was good friends of Charming's mother. Cruella wasted no time in bragging to my mum how Maleficent was engaged to be married. At this time, I was graduating from college, which really got under her skin. I still didn't talk directly to her, but I did keep up communication with my cousin. When I talked to her about the upcoming wedding, Maleficent revealed that Cruella was planning to take grandma off life support and would use the money from grandma's estate and insurance to pay for a lavish wedding. Maleficent also revealed that she did not want to marry Charming, was fed up with college, she was a 7th year senior, basically living the life Cruella had created for her. I mentioned to my mum what Aunt had said about grandma going off life support, and Mum was livid. She called my cousin and they crafted the revenge against Cruella together. Revenge. In June, Cruella decided to host a very over-the-top party to celebrate the engagement. Mum and I chose not to attend as we chose to visit grandma in the hospital together that night. So my cousin's actions were reported to me by my cousin herself, but I'm going to phrase them. Cruella had organised the evening so that the parents of the engaged couple and the engaged couple could stand to tell everyone in the room how amazing their respective families were. Charming and his parents had already gushed their praises for Cruella, and it was Maleficent's turn. Maleficent thanked Cruella for raising her, thanked Charming's parents for raising such a good son, then announced that the wedding was off. She took the opportunity to tell Charming that she did care about him but would not marry him, just because it was what their families expected from soon-to-be parents. Maleficent then left the party and spent the night with one of her friends from high school. This humiliated Cruella on a personal and financial level. She had already paid non-refundable deposits for a caterer, wedding reception hall, dress, limo, etc., and she was out of hundreds of dollars. Furthermore, Cruella and Charming's parents were very against premarital sex, which made Maleficent's unexpected announcement even more appalling. Cruella had planned to keep the pregnancy as hidden as possible with the dress that she had selected, the floral arrangement, etc., and Maleficent was expected to remain complicit. She called Maleficent and raged at her several times, but Maleficent stood her ground. She returned the car Cruella had bought for her and informed Cruella that she was dropping out of college as well, which would leave Cruella thousands of dollars in debt. The drama took a back seat when Grandma passed away in early August. Maleficent had gotten a job in a corporate office by then and showed up to the funeral looking very happy and very pregnant. After the funeral, we had a reception and Cruella called Mum, me, my cousin and my uncle and my other aunt into a room together to announce that she was going to sell Grandma's house and the land and would split up Grandma's life insurance policy money as she saw fit. It was the expected announcement from her and she phrased it as something Grandma would have wanted. I don't know who was smiling bigger, Mum or my cousin, when they announced that they were contesting her power as executor of the estate, as Grandma's diagnosis of dementia had been announced just days before Cruella secured her position. Mum had consulted a lawyer to contest the decisions Cruella had made. Mum and Cruella ended up going to court and the matter was resolved less than a year later. Cruella's position as executor of the estate was overruled due to Grandma's mental capacity at the time. This meant that, outside of a life insurance policy Cruella had taken on Grandma, she received no money directly. Maleficent is paying on her student loans, but Cruella is still paying off her debts from living beyond her means. My mum agreed to letting Maleficent and her newborn daughter move into Grandma's old house, and she and Charming are co-parenting. Too long didn't read. My aunt was an abusive, manipulative nut. Her daughter felt she could not make the cut, but when she got older, she also became bolder. Now Auntie is stuck in a sad little rut.